Good evening, everyone. My name is Alan Esteron. I'm one of the assistant chaplains here at St. Thomas More. On behalf of Father Ryan, Joe Connolly, and the whole STM staff, I welcome you to the 40th anniversary celebration of the Soup Kitchen. Over the summer, I asked Paul Kennedy, one of our trustees and a founding member of the Soup Kitchen, about his recollection of the beginning of the ministry. He said that in the fall of 1983, when the chaplaincy was under the leadership of Father Richard Russell, our neighbor, Christ Church, had asked whether STM could possibly run a soup kitchen on Wednesday, offering lunch once a week and giving Christ Church a relief so that they could use their time and space for parish meetings. Under the guidance of Father Cohen, associate chaplain to Father Richard, a group of faculty, staff, and students responded to the challenge, gathering cooking pans, getting dry goods from Connecticut Food Bank, and transforming the chapel hall, the basement of the chapel, into a soup kitchen. 50 guests came in for the very first day, and 115 the next week. Fast forward to today, the soup kitchen serves more than 200 guests every Wednesday, and in recent years, it has been serving 10,000 plus meals from October to April. The mission is made possible by the generosity of donors and the service of so many dedicated volunteers. And I'd say big thanks to our donors and volunteers. Some are here and some are graduated from Yale. So thank you, dear volunteers. Now, as we reflect on the importance of this ministry and the gospel call to feed the hungry, let us listen to our guest speaker tonight. I have the honor to introduce Dr. Carolyn Woo. Dr. Woo has coordinated and facilitated the Vatican Dialogues for Energy Transition, served on numerous corporate boards, and led Catholic Relief Services, or CRS, as CEO from 2012 to 2016. For those who don't know CRS designs and implements over 1,000 programs annually to reduce poverty, diminish risk, and foster prosperity. And she also served as Dean of the Mendoza College at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana from 1997 to 2011. Dr. Woo received her bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees from Purdue University. In 2013, Dr. Woo was cited by Foreign Policy as one of the 500 most powerful people on the planet and one of only 33 in the category of a force for good. Let us welcome Dr. Carolyn Woo as she addresses the topic, food and faith. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Sorry to ruin your dinner. I always have this dilemma about being people's dinner speaker. But I'm just really pleased to be here. Everybody I've met, the students, and met Mary Margaret and Connor, who are the co-captains or co-leaders of the CRS chapter, Alan, Louis, who took care of me, and just talking to Pat and Kathy at my table. Kathy has been volunteering for 25 years. Her husband, Pat, has been doing for 15 years. And there's such love as they describe the meals that they prepare. So it is a thank you tonight to you by the people who are served by you. They may not be here today, but you are a light. You know, Father talked about being light in darkness, and just a treat on Wednesday. And both Pat and Kathy were saying that the soup kitchen here has the reputation of being one of the best in New Haven. So a big hand for everybody who make this possible. So I just want to say the work which is done is not only benefiting the people who are your guests who are being served, but I think actually it's very important for the rest of us. I think we need reminder of goodness. Goodness is the signature of God. And when we manifest that goodness, it's a reminder that God is among us. And in today's world, we really need to have that reminder of goodness. And in addition to that, it's not just there is goodness, but I think we are called ourselves to be good, to be better. When we observe examples of other people, I think adults learn from other adults. And I think seeing people being honest, have high integrity, generous, serving others, is a reminder, a call to us to do the same. Tonight I have about 30 minutes or so, and so I'm just going to hit a few high points. I just named my presentation, my comments to you, food and faith. Before I go very far, I just want to say food is not the most central characters in scriptures, the most central characters are God and the people of God. But I would put food as sort of the third character. In scriptures, I did a quick little search and I found a website, I think it's called Knowing Jesus or something, and it says food is mentioned 1,200 times in scriptures. It is integral to scriptures. And actually, the Bible begins with the book of Genesis. And in the book of Genesis, God told us that he gave us fruits and trees with seeds and so on. And all of those things were to be our food. So from the very beginning, we are given a sense of God's bounty and God's desire to make sure that we are well fed. And of course, the first meal, which is mentioned of our original parents, was about the apple. The first act of disobedience is around a piece of fruit. And we move on from there. We have, remember Abraham, who was visited by 3 angels, 3 strangers, and it was so important to him. But of course, his wife and the servants did all the work. But he also had to, be generous with his cattle. He entertained 3 strangers without knowing who they were, and of course, they happened to be the messengers from God. Moses in the Exodus, the whole thing preceded with the Paschal meal, with the Passover meal. And then when they were in the desert and the people were hungry and they were rebelling, manna came from the sky. And it was very interesting. The manna was good manna, but you cannot hoard it. You cannot store it. It's just every day it comes just for that day. And so where Moses, and of course in the Torah, there are very strict laws. The Jubilee, for example, is a year to remember and to serve the people who go without. Or people who were planting and so on, they were to leave the edges of their plots for strangers who came by. And then we come to Jesus. Jesus' very first miracle before he started his ministry, he was tempted to turn stone into bread. So foundational. The role of food, which of course represents everything material. So Jesus' first miracle, of course, was to change water into wine, a feast. Okay, and that's also food. Jesus' various miracles, multiplying the loaves of bread and fishes, sending Peter out and with nets that overflowed with fishes, that whole idea of abundance. When Jesus taught us the prayer, Our Father, give us this day our daily bread. So foundational to us. And of course, Jesus' last act before he died was to have the Last Supper. And so I just want to kind of remind all of us how much food is the medium of the interaction between God and all of us. So God, the people of God, and food. I think next time when we approach our food, that may be an interesting to remember. I don't have a lot of overheads, just a few pages, just so that you can follow me where I go. I just talk about food and scriptures. Having gone through that, God, people of God, and food reminds us that food is highly relational. Food is relational. It's not just my imbibing food as a solo, single person activity, that the way that food is presented to us is highly relational, right? So I just want to cite 3 points about the relational aspect of food. So the first one is something which is very dear to each one of us, is really the principle by which we act, is that the whole issue of food justice, which I just really want to boil it down, is really about justice, is about right relationships. And in this case, the principle of this, the starting point of this, is that it's the right relationship with God. And of course, in the gospel today, we are reminded that any relationship with God is also the relationship to our neighbors. And now, of course, the relationship to the earth. But the right relationship, very simply put, with God is the sense that we're talking about the economy of God, God's economy. And God's economy is about grace. It's about free gift. The food, the creation, everything that we have is a free gift. And that gift is free, but clearly food is not free. And that food is not only free, but it's meant for everyone. And not just people living, as we now know, and Pope Francis tells us that too, is the people who follow us. They too should have a claim on that food is also given to them. And so, in a food system, we do need organization. Somebody has to till the land and plant it and harvest it and make it available. So, we do need organization. But that organization has really turned into control and monetization. And that monetization, in a way, distorts the accessibility of that food. But the first thing about right relationship with God is that we are dealing with God's economy, a free gift. The second thing I want to say is that food is also about intimacy and hospitality. And I think it's mentioned so often in the Bible. And by the way, the last book of the Bible, Revelations, also end with 2 feasts. And feasts are very loaded word. You think about feast, it's usually abundance, the best food possible, lots of people, and it's a celebration. And so, I think that food is also so much there, not only because it's essential to our own survival, but I think it's essential to our relationships. I love to eat, but if you think about Jesus' ministry, so often he was eating with people. He shared meals with Lazarus, Martha, and Mary. Matthew, Zacchaeus, he said, come down from the tree, I'm going to your house to dine. And everywhere he encounters people, he would bring them to his table. And of course, those people are the lowly people, the people who are usually despised by others. They could be tax collectors, they are sinners, they are prostitutes. But those are the people that Jesus welcomed to his table. It's a table of fellowship, of friendship, of hospitality, and of intimacy, of how we know each other. And so when I ask Pat and Kathy, what are their favorite foods to cook? And they said, well, it depends on our guests. What is their favorite food? Because that's what we want to do for them. I think that's such a measure of hospitality and a sense of intimacy, because immediately they claim that these guests are important to them and have a claim on them. Of course, on the road to Emmaus, the people walking, the disciples, they didn't know that Jesus was walking with them. And, later on we were told Jesus had a meal with them, and at that meal, they knew they were eating with the Lord. And of course, in the Eucharist, that is the most intimate, God giving us his own flesh. I just want to use two secular examples also to illustrate a little bit about the intimacy aspect. How many of you have seen and remember the movie Babette's Feast? Yeah, lots of hands. And, just very shortly, and it's been so long, like maybe 30 years or 25 years since I've seen that movie. But I remember the story is going like this. There's this French woman, she came to this town. In my memory, it was a German town. Was it a German town? It was, but anyway, she was just a housekeeper. She did housekeeper type of work. And that village, the people were very austere. They were very serious. They were austere. And they didn't spend much money on food. They were just always focused on sort of the most basic things and tasks. Well, she came into a sum of money. I forgot what it was, but it was a pretty good sum of money. And she decided to have this incredible feast, the most rare of foods, the most expensive of foods, the type of mushrooms and pheasants and so on that nobody would even dream of having it. She spent all of her money buying this food, and she spent days cooking this food. And she invited the whole village to come and have this feast. I mean, at first people were sort of like, what is this? It's a bit strange. Okay, we'll go to this meal. And the movie was about how people started enjoying themselves. They enjoyed the food. They knew they were treated royally. They started having a good time. I guess wine also can do that to you. But never mind, they were treated to sort of the best of everything. And they knew it. And they loved it. And they enjoyed it. And they started laughing. And they started talking to each other. And they started telling stories. And they started making amends with each other. And I think that is such a powerful illustration of what does it mean to have a meal. And the final person I want to talk about under this issue of intimacy and hospitality is a Protestant theologian by the name of Karl Barth. Karl Barth wrote about encounter long before Pope Francis talked about encounter. Pope Francis asked us to encounter. And Karl Barth actually had 4, and I extended it to actually 5 dimensions of what an encounter is. He said, first of all, you have to be with someone. First of all, you have to behold the person. You have to look at the person. You have to sort of like take in this face and know what life has been lived, sort of the stories that are sort of marked, the stories that mark that face. The second thing he said is, you got to listen. You got to listen. And the third one was, you got to share. This is a return. It's a mutual relationship, that there needs to be that give and take. And then the fourth thing he said is, you have to be for that person. It is not enough to just be next to each other. But there must be something in you for which you want the good in the other. And in fact, we heard that at Mass today too. So you have to be beholding the person. That's got to be the give and the taking in and the sharing with the person. That got to be a sense that you're for that person. And finally, he said, to do all of this in a context of delight. To know that we don't just run into people randomly, that all encounters really have God in the middle, and that there must be this sense of delight. And I can't think of any other context more than a table of fellowship, of food, of hosting, cooking for someone, of wanting someone to enjoy what you have done, of sitting long enough to have the exchange, and really the sense of delight in each other. So just want to talk about that a little bit. And finally, of course, food is related to redemption. When Jesus asked Peter, "Do you love me?" 3 times, and he said, "Of course I love you, you know that." And each time, what did Jesus say? He said, "Feed my sheep and tend my sheep." Right? That's the command, just like today's command. Love God and love your neighbors, and actually more active to feed and to tend my sheep. Matthew 25, we're pushing to that time of the year, the judgment gospels are coming, and Matthew 25 was, "Did you feed the hungry?" I was in the hungry. Jesus was in the hungry. And of course, just think about the prodigal son, that when the son returned after doing all the bad deeds that he did, but he recognized his father's servants had more to eat than he did. And he went back, and there's this incredible feast for him, to the point that the brother was very jealous. And so that was another story about sort of how that food is accompanied by that, is an expression of that incredible love and mercy. And of course, again, in the Eucharist. So this gives us some sense, food is integral place in scriptures. Food, we talk about justice, but it's the right relationships that started with the fact that we are in God's economy. And whatever we did, some part good in sort of cultivating and making food available, somewhere there's the over monetization, and in some ways the weaponization of food. And with my CRS work, we actually saw when people were in conflict, different tribes fighting, for dominance, different factions and so on. One of the things they did was to starve people to death. And the way you would do that is to kick them off their land, to ruin their crops, to take their cattle. Because once they have no crops and no cattle, they will slowly die. And so, in some ways in Gaza, we are seeing some of that too. And so the monetization and the weaponization of food is really a crime against God. So I just want to go into the next one. I don't think you could see it, but I thought it was important to give you a sense of where we are in terms of food. This is the 2022 report that came out of the UN. I would say, overall 2022 was a bad year. It's a mixed year in the sense that we had the pandemic and we had issues about supply chains of food. We had a lot of price increases about food. I don't know whether you remember, there was an issue with milk in the US. There was an issue with eggs. In the US, there were an issue with baby formula. There were all sorts of shortages. And of course, fuel was very high, and fuel is an input to food. But I just want to give you some sense. I'll read you a little bit what you can't see. The second goal of the UN Sustainable Development Goals related to food, which is to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. And basically the report card at the upper left says at risk. We're not doing a good job. We are not at all making real progress. Underneath it, underneath the zero hunger goal, you have a bowl and then you have some statistics. It says that more than 600 million people worldwide are projected to face hunger in 2030. So 600 million, we have about 8 billion people in the world, so it's a bit less than 10%, but 600 million is a very big number. To the right of it at the top, it says little or no progress in terms of the reduction in anemia. Anemia, of course, is the insufficient red blood cells, which generally can be addressed if you have iron-rich foods. But iron-rich foods are not always available in developing countries. It shows that about a third of women are anemic, and that it has been so for a period of time. And at the very bottom, there's a panel of children, and it gives a sense. Stunting affects about 150 million children. Stunting is really the height is not comparable to the weight. And those of you into statistics, is less than 2 standard deviations. So the height is much less than what that weight requires. And there's wasting, about 45 million. Wasting is the opposite. Wasting is the weight is not comparable to the height. And that's 45 million. So we're talking about hundreds of millions of people really undernourished. In the US, the report for 2022 also is not good. So in 2021, about 10% of our population have food insecurity. In 2022, that has gone up to about 12 to 13%. And again, 2022 is a bad year, and the increase in children who have food security is a much higher jump. So, so overall, I don't know exactly how 2022 will become 2023. As I say, it's a bit mixed. As we all know, there was a lot of price increases from fuel to food. I think everybody who goes to the grocery store have a sense that food prices are much higher. On the other hand, 2 things have happened. One is during 2022, there was a lot of subsidies. So families, low-income families were receiving stipends for their children, and that actually helped. People who were interviewed, and in the statistics that was helpful, but of course those subsidies have ended December 2022. So it's not clear, and also now in 2023, some of the prices have come down. But overall, the hunger issue is worse and not better. Now, in the US hunger solutions are different than the hunger solutions in international countries. There's some of the same causes and some different. But in the US, there's of course the whole issue of charity food, which is necessary but totally insufficient in addressing the hunger problem. The second part of it is, of course, the subsidies, the federal and state subsidies, the SNAP program, the allocations for women, infant, and children. Those are proven to be very important. But of course, those are political footballs. They're always targeted for, reduction. And also sometimes a lot of hoops the paperwork of it can be a little bit torturous. And people have to meet certain types of requirements. And so it is there, but it could be improved. And overall, these type of SNAP programs and WIC, they are actually several hundred millions of dollars, which is actually a very small fraction. Our deficit right now as a country is $2 trillion. And actually it's not due to more spending, it's less tax revenues that's a problem. And so, but, always they try to put these SNAP programs. I mean, how much can you cut? So the tens of millions that are to be cut actually is a very small percentage. The third thing that needs to be done really, hunger is related to poverty. And poverty is related to issues such as wages. And now, fortunately, in the last few years, wages have really gone up. It used to be like $15 as a minimum wage was unthinkable, and I think now it's no longer unthinkable. That's a good move. but more needs to be done. And it's not just wages. It's also flexibility in people's work arrangements in terms of their benefits too, their health benefits, their time off for being sick, and so on. So, but the third area is poverty. And by the way, I mean, it's ironic, but you know that the food workers, there's about 1 out of 8 people in the United States are involved in the food industries, and they are usually food insecure. They have low wages, and they themselves have problem with access. So that's another issue, which are workers, the food workers in the system, and of course the whole system of manufacturing and distribution of food. So those are some of the things that in the country that we look at. I just want to share a few stories with you. I don't think I have time for all of it. Let me just start with Ernesto, the upper left. Ernesto was a farmer I met. You know, sometimes all these things are so theoretical, you know, and they're policy oriented, and, you know, wages are too low, and, you know, we're gone. I mean, it's to some abstract issue called wages. Ernesto was a farmer. I think I met him in Nicaragua. He was a corn farmer, and just like his neighbors, they couldn't sell the corn. It was poor quality, and there was no demand, and there was oversupply of this corn. But this is what his father and grandfather had farmed. He didn't know what else to do. He would hide, however, whenever he heard the sound of a motorcycle. And the reason is that the only people who had motorcycles were the debt collectors. They were the ones who lent money. And in some of these small agricultural communities, the cost of borrowing money is 12% a month. You know, so these were supposed to be the money that you borrow to buy seeds, to buy fertilizers. And if you have a bad year, you know, that 12% just keeps stacking up. And so Ernesto would go hide whenever he heard a motorcycle coming. CRS at that time, working with USAID, was offering a program to retrain farmers in a completely different crop. I think it was passion fruit. Farmers are unwilling to do that because it's very high risk and they don't know what to do with that. So it's a program where they get free seeds the first year, because if they're successful, they should be able to get cash. And passion fruit is actually a cash crop. I mean, just think about all of the smoothies that you've encountered. There's passion fruit in there. And so it was a program where he gets free seeds and also the whole accompaniment about how to grow passion fruit. Well, he learned, and he had a successful crop. He generated enough cash, actually, to be able to buy his own seeds and to retire his debt. But he did more than just make money. He learned a lot. So this is what he learned. For example, when they plant these seeds in the field, they get a 70% yield. But he decided that if you germinate the seed in a greenhouse and let the seed grow to about 3 inches, you could put it in a field at that point, and the harvesting was about 95%. All right? And so in order to do that, he needed to have the medium, the soil, to use for germinating the plant. And the soil would be greatly enriched by animal waste. So the women in the community formed themselves into a business, and their business was to collect animal manure and sell them to the farmers. And it would just be mixed into the soil. I actually saw this. And it would enrich the soil. It would attract earthworms, which aerate the soil, and, you know, do all sorts of good things in it. And then meanwhile, to build greenhouses, they needed to be able to have access to working capital. And so he started doing that, and he had enough of a track record now to be able to, you know, that whole additional 25% yield on his crop was a big deal. And of course, passion fruit, high cash value. So he started doing that, but he also decided that fertilizers and pesticides were very expensive, and most of those are sold by multinational companies with very high profit margins. And he decided that they don't need fertilizers and pesticides. They only use a small fraction compared to that. And so he also reduced his product cost associated with it. He was so successful that he started teaching other farmers how to do this. And they do co-ops together in moving to passion fruit and in a way which is highly profitable. He had 2 children when he was, and they were not going to pay the tuition. He had no more money for tuition for these 2 children. Well, his 2 children graduated from college in agricultural economics. And he now owns 2 motorcycles. All right. So these things are very granular. And just one more example in terms of the group we call intelligence. So I think that was in Guatemala, and we work with the women co-ops. We work with women in different villages and organize them. And one of the things that they didn't have access to was water. Potable water that they could drink. And they would have to go down to the meager little river where people would fight over water. The water was very polluted. There's all sorts of things in it. Children would fight. Women would fall, so they have injuries. So in order to have water delivered there, we had to deal with the whole water system. How do you have to have pipes to connect to the main source and how it would be delivered. And the whole, how do we fund this? And actually we use a model like mortgages. So if it costs $50, for example, to have the pipes go from the main pipe out there far away to your home is $50, we just do a mortgage, which is you spread it out over 50 months. Each month you pay $1. But that, by the way, is how we use financial solutions. All these solutions are multidimensional. And so these women then had water, and with water they were able to grow vegetables. They sold their vegetables to the cities, to restaurants and so on. They were able to not be sick, not have diarrhea, because they have much cleaner water. They also have these pills that they use for filtration. Their children and they have more time now because they were not collecting water. And then they became a learning group. So once you organize them to deal with sort of the water availability, they become a group that you could work with in terms of doing savings. They become a savings circle. And you could also give them lessons on numeracy, on food preparation, on nutrition, on whether they should buy a solar lamp. By the way, in one country, I think it was in Laos, we actually worked with a small group of women in these contexts, and they were the Legion of Mary, for example. They came together to do this. I remember my visit very well. I went to visit that village. To welcome us, they used pine needles. You know how people roll out the red carpet? The equivalent of the roll of the red carpet were pine needles, which were very fragrant. You could imagine, They did that. They showed me to their homes. And the homes were very modest, of course. They hardly have a chair. People use burlap sack for like curtains and very basic, but they always had a picture of the Blessed Mother. And the group of women, they were to give themselves a name. And I said, "What is your name?" And they said, "Intelligence." They said, "We realized that we are smart. We could learn. We could make our lives better. We could grow. We could grow vegetables. We could take care of our children. We have tuition for them. And when they are sick, we could pay for them care." I have lots of these stories, so I'm not going to continue. And I just want to end this because it's time to end this. To end with, one of my favorite person is Father Ted Hesburgh. He was a tremendous mentor to me. When I started at Notre Dame, within the first week, he wanted to see me. He was president emeritus, a brilliant man, and very faith-filled. He actually had disagreements with Nixon, Richard Nixon, and he was tossed off the nuclear safety board or whatever, but wonderful man. And this is the prayer from him, but before I say that, he told me two things, which I never forget. He said, there is no inappropriate time. There's always the right time. In every situation that you are in, you invoke the Holy Spirit. Just say, come, Holy Spirit, in everything. And the second thing he said is, I used to sign my name, yours, in Notre Dame. And he said, if you're serving the Blessed Mother, good enough is not good enough. We never serve the Blessed Mother with mediocrity. And actually, in a lot of work and not-for-profit, people are happy to do good work, to do work which is kind. But our staff at CRS, and I've challenged them, it's not enough to do good enough work. Because people who depend on you, people who are poor, people who don't have food, they get if you work at good enough work, they get this much. If you do better work, they get this much. If you do really good work and think through the sustainability issues, they stand on their own. And so Hesburgh always said, for the Blessed Mother, good enough is not enough. But he also loved to say this prayer. And it goes with, for those who are hungry, we pray for food. For those who have food, we pray for a hunger for justice. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Woo. I think we have some time for maybe a couple of questions. I could start. Our soup kitchen guests, we love them and we welcome them, and we are glad to see them every Wednesday. But also when we talk as volunteers, we also want them to move forward and not see them, and maybe meaning that they probably got a job or found a home. I wonder how have you seen local governments work with maybe faith communities in making sure that, again, you mentioned charity food, it's direct service, but I wonder how have you seen local city, towns work together in making sure they kind of move on or have different opportunities? Thank you.
And actually, as we deal with this issue of hunger, they're multidimensional. One is, of course, the whole charity dimension. Another one is, of course, the way that we ourselves live. But the third way, too, is how do we really become part of the solutions to the problem? And there are multiple. One is advocacy, in terms of what you do with our congressional representatives and so on. I think some of the students who work with CRS now have come to realize, you won't believe it, but your congressional representatives actually do listen, because they're tallying as they take the phone call, who said this was important, and they just really tally those things. But I think that there is a need whenever SNAP and whatever aid program has come up, and they usually get approved 2 years, once every 2 years. And so in those periods, you have to be sure that you're doing the advocacy part of it. A lot of local organizations now are stepping up to the food issue of it, such as, you have the issue of production and how can we localize production. So a lot of urban farms. So I live in South Bend, which is pretty urban. in a sense, but we have a few young couples who are doing their urban farms, and I buy my microgreens from them and so on, and they are selling in the local food market. But the other part of it is that the distribution now are using more types of organizations to make sure that produce are available, sometimes in schools, sometimes in the Y, sometimes in various community service organizations. I one time was listening to, I think NPR did an interview about all these dollar stores, general dollar stores or whatever it is, popping up in all cities, rural areas, and so on. And they're saying that these dollar stores are bad for people because they chase out all the grocery stores, and so people have no access to produce because grocery stores have produce, whereas dollar stores have cans of things. I listened to this. I said, no, I don't buy this, because I think people do need dollar stores so that when they buy a roll of aluminum, it's $1.25. Everything is $1. I mean, I go shop there too. I know what is in there. But here is really, we need to have other alternatives to encourage how produce come into a community. Whether you have community gardens, for example, there's a lot of areas where they've started community gardens, and even in cities and so on. So I think we have to reimagine how food can be grown. It could be grown on rooftops, it could be grown on people's verandas, it could be grown on plots and so on. It does need a little bit of help. So I think actually there are those, and of course, in different organizations now helping people, we have a very, very inspiring and successful organization called Casa de Amistad, and it actually helps refugees and migrants, not just Hispanic, even though it has a Spanish name, but all of this, including Syria, Afghans, and so on, to come in. And the programs are just excellent. Multiple programs, including things such as how do you give people an identity card? Because if you don't have a Social Security, you couldn't even go to the library. And I would say our mayor at that point was Pete Buttigieg. And I would say Pete Buttigieg really is smart and heart in the right place. So he started this program where he gave people South Bend ID card, but at least you have an ID card that allows you, therefore, to do free bus passes and libraries and stuff like this. And of course, a lot of job training. They have a citizenship class that if you attend 80% of the classes, it was 100% pass rate. And they also work with the local companies and so on. They took a lot of the computers. You know how companies retire computers once every 3 years or 2 years? They took those computers and they work with the phone companies and so on to get internet connectivity and train people up in IT type of work. I forgot from where, they got a driving simulation machine so that women, think about an Afghan woman who comes into town and has to learn driving. There's hardly a car for her. And, it's not in their culture for her to be with a stranger driving. So just having that driving simulator for these women to be able to come in and, practice a lot on that simulator before they go out. It just goes on and on. So I think there are a lot of, these organizations and it is the first nonprofit in the St. Joe County where we are, who has put in solar panels. And along the way, they instructed the teenagers how to put on solar panels. Not that you can hire these teenagers, but then they have a sense that they could go to community college to learn how to install solar. But I think there's just all these things that can be done. But I think the key is we all have to, in some ways, contribute to the solution. Not what we need to attend to the causes and outcomes of hunger. I mean, people need food now. But I think the bigger drivers of hunger to be contributing to the solution, whether it's through advocacy, whether it's participating or supporting community gardens and that sort of thing. By the way, I just recently visited a very much state-of-the-art memory center, which is a drop-in center for adults. And it was so well done. It's all done in the mode of a village, of a, storefront and all of those things. And if you were a caregiver to one of these people, you and the person you care for can come in the whole day for free, because the grant that did this was for caretakers. But one of the things they had was planter boxes for growing vegetables. And they're quite big. They're like together maybe a third of the size of this room, these raised boxes to plant gardens. And this is for people with dementia, as part of their activities, to be growing vegetables. And these vegetables are available to the community. So I think how we imagine that solution is very important. All right. Oh, one more? Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Woo, for your talk. I love what you were talking about in terms of encounter, and I'm wondering if you have any personal experiences from your own life in which you've had food as a method of encounter and a way that that's made an impact on your life.
So food is always a major thing, given the type of work that CRS does. We do a lot of incredible disaster relief, and food is always part of disaster relief. I think one of the most fun experience I had, I think I was in Greece, and Greece at that time was having all sorts of economic hardships. It could not pay its own bonds and so on. But for some reason, it was generous to the Syrians. The Syrians could ride the bus for free, and different organizations had set up food kitchens. So that day, the CRS team, and included a bishop and me and different people, we were manning the table. So people would come through, we were dishing out food and so on. And that day was wonderful because a local farmer, a Greek farmer, had brought in these tomatoes. They were like this big and red, like real tomatoes. So we have a big tub of those to add to the plate. But somebody else also brought in chocolates. And so we also have a big bucket of chocolates, but we had to hide this under the table because, there were lots of children too, and we would go down and grab some chocolates and give it to each kid. Now, this is a totally inoperable way, and which is all the kids then went under the table to go get the chocolate. And I just didn't know what to do, what to do. And the bishop next to me had even less clue about what to do. Now, people were not grabbing tomatoes. They were grabbing chocolates. And, it was like gaggle of kids, And the adults actually would send the kids to get more, for little brother. And so and I said there, it's totally, ineffective. All right, totally, have lost all control over this tub of chocolates. And I just told myself, I said, God, you didn't really need me to do anything, right? It's a free-for-all. Yes, people who come later on may not have it. That's sort of but the joy of these Syrian refugee children and chocolate, it almost seems inhuman to try to regulate them, to pull them out from under the table, make them stand in a line and give them 5 each or whatever it was. I think that moment, it was in some ways a spiritual moment for me because I'm a control person. I like to make sure that everybody gets 5. But that day, it was not possible. And I really looked at this, I said, this is undiluted joy. Undiluted joy. All just with chocolate for people who have nothing. And that was it. But a lot of the examples of just the intelligence group. I'll tell you another group of women we work with again, and this was in Afghanistan. And we trained the women to start their own businesses. They could do, different things. And this group of women decided that they were going to make butter cookies. They were sort of the donuts, equivalent of donuts in the US, but they're butter cookies and they are real butter because in Afghanistan they don't have fake butter. And so, we trained them, they had an oven, and we gave them 3 months of working capital, which is enough money to buy their flour, their sugar, their butter, and all of those things. And so when I visited with them, several things, they said, we used up all of our working capital. Oh, I thought, oh no, what did they do? Money is gone, it's fine, And I said, why did you use up all your working capital? They said, well, we decided to sell butter cookies to the policemen. You see a lot of movies where policemen in the US have to buy donuts. I think that is a global phenomenon. Police everywhere have to buy something. So these women sold their butter cookies, yeah, they're very good actually, to the policemen, and they were all sold out. And they actually told us, we are ready for a second oven. This is just after 1 month. And they said, we want to learn more arithmetic and how to manage us because we are now very successful. So I was talking to this woman, she was breastfeeding a baby, and I said, is this your first baby? And she said, no, my first one died. He starved to death. Okay, so that's the difference. And in a lot of the people I've seen, they wouldn't let their children starve. They would not eat themselves so that their children can eat. It's just that she was breastfeeding the first one. She had no milk. And the baby had no other food. So, this is the type of situation where people actually die from not having food. But that was very funny about the policeman buying butter cookies. All right? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Woo, reminding us that goodness, the act of goodness is a reminder of God, and food is a medium between God and people. So thank you so much. Thank you for joining us tonight. At the back of the hall, you'll see brief reflections from former soup kitchen volunteers. Please take time to look at them. This is an ongoing project. We will collect additional reflections from current volunteers in the coming weeks. To end, let me read one of the reflections written by Jackie Owesterblad. She writes, going to law school during a pandemic in a new and cold and dark place when we're feeling a little lost. In the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger. Let me repeat that, sorry. In a cold and dark place can be a very difficult experience. God very helpfully tells us where we can find Him. We're finding Him in the lost, in the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, the naked, the sick, and the imprisoned. I will forever be grateful to STM Soup Kitchen for giving me a place to go every week to find community, to find purpose, and to find God. Good night, everyone.